I'm Nicole Shanahan, Bobby Kennedy's running mate. Welcome to Back to the People podcast, which highlights the growth of a movement uniting America, where our government is free from corporate capture and where we give voice back to the American public.
One day my boss called me in. This was at the bank, Crocker Bank in San Francisco. And she said, I don't know how to tell you this, but the word has come down that we can't promote white men.
What year was this?
This is the 80s. So I started working on this little comic that I've been doing in my spare time in my cubicle called Dilbert. Sent it off to Playboy and the New Yorker. They paid the most for comics in those days. They both rejected me. A few other people rejected me. So I thought, well, I've tried. And one day I go to the mailbox and there's a second letter from the cartoonist who gave me the original advice. And he came across my original letter and it had some samples in it. And he said he just wanted to make sure I hadn't given up. Got my materials down.
And what year was this?
So it was 1988 and then 1989 it launched.
We were talking together about failure. What feels like failure might be a gift.
Yeah, I wrote a book on that topic. It's called How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big.
How would you advise people grapple with the feeling of failure?
My reframe for that is not winning or losing. Mm-hmm. Rather, it's a long march. You're going to lose 9 out of 10, which, by the way,
what a gift, yeah.
I think is a key to creativity. The way my brain works is ideas are flowing through unstoppable. So the real trick is to release them, because it lets the new one in.
You had asked me before we got on, you said, do you know what my political take is and stance? I was like, well, my understanding, Scott, is that you just really understand the zeitgeist of American politics. You predicted that Donald Trump would win in 2016. How did you know?
I'm actually a hypnotist. So I studied hypnosis in my 20s. I noticed in him the techniques of persuasion that were not just good, but insane. He has a provocative technique which he knows will anger like crazy some set of people while it completely turns on the other people who need to vote for him in the primary.
How are you reading the zeitgeist for this upcoming election?
RFK Jr.'s focus on the food and the pharma is a really strong point for him, because I don't like people who can't figure out what the top priorities are. And the top priorities, in my view, are basically food and debt. Mm-hmm. I think you're 3 heartbeats away from the presidency right now, because Biden, I don't even know if he's going to make it to the starting line. I do worry about the health of both RFK Jr. and Trump. I think we're in dangerous and uncertain times. And so I do worry about their physical safety.
Scott, thanks for joining me today. You've got some real magic, and I think how I was thinking about it was understanding the zeitgeist of America, and you read situations with such clarity and then bolster it with humor. What was your arc? I even, I saw you had gone and gotten an MBA at UC Berkeley at one point.
Right.
And I was like, but I would love to hear your story arc.
I'll give you the fast forward version. So I had a mother who was a portrait artist. She would do oil painting, and I had a dad who liked to write jokes. Like when I was in college, you'd write little joke letters almost every day. And you put them together and genetically it creates me. I can draw a little bit and I'm a little bit funny, but you put the two together and there aren't too many people who could do both of those things. So it kind of made the cartooning work. So I was, when I was 6 years old, I wanted to be Charles Schulz because I saw Peanuts books and fell in love with the comics. And, I learned to read so I could read comics. That was my incentive. It's like, if only I could read these comics. So probably at about age 6, I saw a story about Charles Schulz, and I think it was Life magazine, one of these old-timey magazines. And it just looked like a great life to be a cartoonist. And I said, I'm going to be a famous cartoonist. I think I'll do that for a living. When you're little, be an astronaut, a famous cartoonist, basketball player. And that plan was solid until I was about 11, and I tried to become a famous artist through the famous artist correspondence class. It was the famous artist school for young people. It was like a little test, and you would draw the little pictures they told you to draw and send it in. They would grade it. And if you did well, you could be part of their correspondence course. And I thought, on my way to be a famous cartoonist. But they rejected me. I did not get accepted in the famous artist school for young people. In their rejection letter, they described it this way. They said, you have to be at least 12 years old.
How old were you?
I was 11 and a half.
You were at 11. Oh, my goodness.
So I did not qualify to be a famous artist. And so I thought, well, I'm crushed. And by the way, I'm starting to understand the world and how odds work, statistics. And even at 11, I knew, wait a minute. How many people were in the world then? Like 5 billion or something? I was like, 5 billion people. There's one Charles Schultz. It's the only thing I think I want to be. What are my odds? And then I gave up on it.
Yeah.
I was just stupid, right? It was like, okay, at about 11, you realize you're not going to play in the NBA. Mm-hmm. But I realized I'm not going to be a famous cartoonist. So my mother told me to be a lawyer based on the fact I grew up in a small town. Mm-hmm. And the only people doing well were the two lawyers.
Where was this town?
Windham, New York, in upstate New York, in the Catskills. And so I went to school to do pre-law and be a lawyer. So I got an economics degree, Hartwick College in Oneonta, New York. And somewhere around then, I thought, I don't think I want to be someone who can't win unless somebody loses. Like somehow that I realized, wait a minute, every time I win, somebody's going to be desperately unhappy because they lost. Can I get into something where everybody's happy? So I thought, well, I'll be a business person. I'll just be a business guy. So I got my economics degree and got a job in a bank and started working on my MBA at night after a few years. And I thought, well, I'll just climb my way to the top of this corporate world. I had the kind of the goods, good grades, and I dressed right and talked right. I said all the right things. And one day my boss called me into the office. This was at the bank, Crocker Bank in San Francisco. And she said, I don't know how to tell you this, but the word has come down that we can't promote white men.
What year was this?
This was in the 80s. And I said, well, you mean like right now? And she was like, it was a woman. And she said, no, until we fix the diversity in senior management, and there's nothing in the pipeline. So how long will it take? It was basically indefinite. And I couldn't really believe what I was hearing. I was like, literally, I can't be promoted because I'm white and male. And she said, yes, directly. So I quit. Not right away. I made sure I had another job to go to. But I left for the phone company, the local phone company. And I got on their management track. And I was like, one of those with the saying was you had a rocket strapped to your ass back in those days. So I had the rocket strapped on my ass, and I was going to go to senior management, and I was in something called the binder, literally a physical binder that each of the executives would have to identify the up-and-comers so they could mentor them and stuff. So I'm in the binder. I'm like, things are good. And one day my boss called me into his office, and he said, I don't know how to tell you this, but the word has come down that we can't promote white men because we just got caught having basically zero diversity in the entire senior management. And I said, how long will that take? And, it's forever. So I started working on side projects, worked on my tennis game, started working on this little comic that I've been doing in my spare time in my cubicle called Dilbert. He got a name from my boss at the time. And I thought, well, I'll see if I can make some pin money, maybe just get a comic published somewhere. Tried some magazines, sent it off to Playboy and the New Yorker. They paid the most for comics in those days. They both rejected me. A few other people rejected me. So I thought, well, I've tried. Now, the only way I knew to even how to submit comics is I saw a TV show on how to be a cartoonist, PBS show. And I wrote I missed the whole show. I just caught the closing credits. And back in those days, you couldn't rewind. So it's like, oh no, it
Yeah.
was my big opportunity. I missed it by 30 seconds. So I wrote down quickly the name of the host in the TV show, and I wrote him a physical letter and said, I'd love to be a famous cartoonist. How do you do it, basically? And he wrote back this 2-page handwritten letter telling me, buy this book. It'll tell you where to submit your comics, what kind of paper to use, and all this. And so I followed all of his instructions and submitted my comics to those magazines. But when they turned me down, I thought, well, at least I tried. I put full effort into it. Total, crash and burn, but not everything works. So I put everything away. A year goes by. And one day I go to the mailbox and there's a second letter from the cartoonist, Jack Cassidy is his name, who gave me the original advice. And he said he was cleaning his office and he came across my original letter and it had some samples in it. And he said he just wanted to make sure I hadn't given up. That was the only reason he wrote.
Wow,
And
that's beautiful.
we didn't even have contact
Yeah.
after I got his original, I just took his advice. And so I thought, well, maybe he sees something that, they didn't see. So I got my comics out, got my materials out, started drawing this Dilbert comic strip and decided, instead of being in a magazine, wouldn't it be better to try to be in newspapers all over the world? And then if that fails, I'll feel like I failed at a much better goal. And that would feel like progress. It's like, at least I had failed at something big. So I sent them in and the rejections came in. There were only, I think, 5 syndication companies. So the big break for a cartoonist is when a syndication company says, we'll do a contract with you, because they're the ones who sell it into the newspapers and you split the money. So one by one, I thought I had them all the rejections came in, and they were brutal. One of them was, perhaps you could find an actual artist to draw the comic for you. That was one. Others were just photocopies of other rejections. They changed the name. So it was brutal.
Wow.
So I get all the rejections.
Yeah.
I thought I had them all. And I said, well, now I've tried twice. Like, wait, what else can you do? Obviously, this is not where I'm meant to be. So I put all my materials away and forgot about it for a few months. And one day the phone rings, and it was a woman who said she worked for some company I never heard of, some company called United Media. And I had not sent my samples to anyone by that name, so now I'm like suspicious. It's like, what kind of a scam is this? How do you even know me? So I said, well, I'm flattered, because she said she wanted to offer me a contract, like just on the phone, first conversation. And she said, I saw your samples. I didn't know how. I want to offer you a contract to be a syndicated cartoonist. And I'm all wary, because I'm a business guy now. Like I negotiate contracts for a living in my day job. And I'm like, I'm very flattered with your offer. But being the cosmopolitan business person I was, I said, but I'm going to need some references for I haven't heard of your outfit, this United Media company. And there's this pause. And then she says, we handle Garfield.
Oh, wow.
And Peanuts.
Uh-huh.
And Roboman and Marmaduke and Nancy. And she got about the 12th name.
Uh-huh.
I realized my negotiating position had been compromised. And I said, yes, well, I'll do that. Sure. Yep.
And what year was this?
So it was 1988, and then 1989 it launched. So you work with them for about a year to make sure that you can really produce one a day.
Yeah. Let's talk about the 80s a little bit and your experience in San Francisco, a very liberal town, with generally, I think, good intentions. And so you're a young man, very smart, came out of one of the top MBA programs in the United States. You have this, childhood desire and curiosity about comics, but you're having success in this corporate world.
Well, success. I mean, I was capped, but go ahead.
Well, you're successful. You're objectively successful until these caps.
Well, I made money. I paid my bills, yes.
Yeah. The 80s. So let's unpack what happened in the 80s around diversity. I was born in 85. So I didn't don't have lived experience, and I think it's very helpful for many of us millennials and Gen Zers to understand what was going on at this time and what the motivations were. So my understanding is that there was a large movement in progressive cities to diversify upper management. It's kind of like the early DEI.
Right.
You know, it's the first generation of it.
Yeah, they didn't need a word. They just knew they had to diversify.
They knew they had to diversify. And so rather than understanding that it will take time to diversify or to, form relationships with universities and bring people up, they just decided to cap certain races from being able to progress inside. Is that what happened?
Not officially. See, officially, if you asked anybody, and Mark Cuban would say this today, he was saying it on social media recently, that if you just try harder, you can get all the diversity you need. So Mark and other people, I think most CEOs would say the same thing in public. In public, they'll say, we just have to try harder and we can make this work. In reality, I think 100% of people who hire know that the pipeline is a little short, meaning that if everybody's trying to get diversity at the same time, that's a lot of fishing poles in the same little pond. And if there were enough, it probably wouldn't have ever been a problem in the first place. In other words, if the supply was always there, people want money more than they care about other stuff. I mean, money really explains almost everything. And if people could have hired great companies with the people that were available, they would have done it wherever they came from.
My personal experience working at law firms, and I'm an attorney and have, never was given a position. I always had to work really hard for every job I was ever given. I did have one corporate experience which felt very pre-1980s, where all of the executive leadership was white male, and being a young woman, it felt like there was this boys club at the company, and this is in the 2000s. So, my company had no DEI requirements. This is 2010 in San Francisco, actually. And I felt frustrated because the boys club was more popular, and I didn't know how to participate in the boys club.
No, what do you mean by that? Does that mean they hung out together and they golfed and stuff? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, they would hang out together. There was a almost like fatherly presence that was given to some of the guys. And I will say there were women in our group, and it was more mixed, but I grew up in Oakland, and I know that my experience was probably a mix of things. So this is like 20 years after your experience, or 30 years after your experience, 30 years. And where we've come, I think, in those many years, especially at large organizations, is kind of this overfitting of DEI requirements. But there's still both cultures, I think, in existence in America today.
Large and small business, that's where the sword is. The smaller business are probably discriminating against minorities and women because they can get away with it, so that they can act more animalistic.
Yeah.
But in the big corporations, since certainly the 90s, it's been anti-white male, seriously anti-white male. But if you go down to a private company, I'm sure it's reversed. I mean, I don't have experience in it, but my assumption is that once you get away from all the scrutiny of the big companies,
Yeah.
it probably reverses. That's my guess.
Yeah. So how did this influence Dilbert? Because Dilbert is one of these really amazing interpretations of office life and I read your comic when I was a kid, and I just thought it was so funny how you could capture such an essence of silliness in corporate America with so few words.
That's really the trick. Now, that comes from probably my upbringing. If you grew up in let's say, a country environment in the hills, so to speak, my graduating class was about 40 people. And most of them I went to kindergarten with in the same building. So it was a really small environment. And there is, culturally, people save words. We're just not real wordy. I have to practice to use more words than I normally would, but I think that comes from really childhood. And then what you do as a cartoonist is you learn to simplify, because one of the big tricks of humor is that simplification and humor are almost identical. And what makes it humor is you simplify it just past what's reasonable. You just go a little too far, and that becomes like a stereotype. Now, if it's racial, it's a bad stereotype. But if it's a technical person acts this way, people will laugh at that. That's still fair game.
Yeah.
A marketing person will act this way, total fair game.
Your focus on highlighting this within corporate America, did that come from your personal experience, or do you have a passion about making people laugh about this absurdity? What's the impetus for why choosing the mundanity of the hubris of corporate infrastructure?
Well, honestly, this is where the MBA came in handy. Honestly, without business experience, the art wouldn't have worked. And here's where the business experience came in. Originally, Dilbert was not a workplace comic. It was launched as a guy who had a job, but it was he and his talking dog hanging out and just doing random things. But every once in a while, he'd be in the office interacting with the boss, and my email would just light up. And people would say, "Oh, we love him in the office. That's the funniest one. It's okay when he's home, but we really like him in the office." Now, if I didn't have an MBA, I would have said, "You people are not understanding my artistic genius. He belongs in the home, damn it. He's a home guy. He has a job. That's not about it." I would be bored writing jokes about the office. But I had an MBA. I wasn't an artist. And so I said, wait a minute. All the customers are saying the same thing. And if they all say the same thing, you really just have to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, it's just irresistible. So I changed the emphasis to basically always in the office, and that's when it took off. So it wasn't a decision on my part. It was gifted to me by the audience.
I just had an interview with this wonderful 18-year-old documentary filmmaker. She just did a documentary on
Grace?
Grace, yes.
Yeah.
And
Grace Price.
Yes, Grace Price. And we were talking together about failure. What feels like failure might be a gift.
Yeah, I wrote a book on that topic. It's called How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. Basically, I go through all the things I tried that didn't work. But I also try to tell people, well, here's what I learned. Don't do that again. Yeah, don't ever do that again. And eventually you build up a bunch of heuristics and rules of thumb, and you build a structure of understanding what's going to work before you try. Not 100%, but you can really start narrowing it down after you make enough mistakes.
How would you advise people grapple with the feeling of failure? Because sometimes, logically we can get through these moments, but the feeling can feel so overwhelming and so depressing. We have such a high mental health crisis in this country. It's hard for the average American to feel like they're winning today.
So my reframe for that is not winning or losing. Mm-hmm. Rather, it's a long march. You're going to lose 9 out of 10. So I go into it saying 9 out of 10 business ideas that I have are not going to work out. But I try so many things. In a typical year, I might try 5 new businesses, within the domain of stuff I do. I might try to write a book or write a page, and I go, no.
Yeah.
Or I might try to license something or do a speech or start a podcast or do something. But I'm always under the impression that it's a 1 out of 10 situation, and that's never going to change. So even though, in theory, I can pick better, projects now because I'm smarter. Even then, 1 in 5 would be great if I could do that.
That framework for being comfortable with failure, just knowing it's likely, more than likely, 9 out of 10 times, or not failure, but
a lot of it is the word.
it's
If you see it as the travel, then it doesn't feel the same. And that's the way I've always seen it. I always thought I'm just going to have to try things and try things and try things. And every time something doesn't work, I can just flush it. Like my brain will just release stuff really fast, which, by the way,
what a gift. Yeah.
I think is a key to creativity. It's just a hypothesis. But the way my brain works is ideas are flowing through unstoppable. So the real trick is to release them because it lets the new one in. So I'm real good at releasing on the past. And I have a belief that the past literally doesn't exist. Like you can't grab it. You can't measure it. You can't hold it. It literally doesn't exist. It's just a little pattern in your brain. So you can say, this is my book, Reframe Your Brain. One of the best reframes is just imagine you're in a video game and you just respawned. Like I could do that right now. It'd be like, boom. All right. Hey, I'm a new game. Oh, I'm talking to you. This is cool. Couch is comfortable. I'm well fed. Yes, let's do this, right? and then my 25 business and personal failures, my 2 marriages that didn't work out. I literally just don't think about them. I'm here now. This is my situation.
How do you not fall prey to comparing yourself to others?
Well, I allow myself to. Why would that be falling prey?
That's a great reframe. I think one of the common things that people will do is compare themselves to others that are maybe where they want to be but aren't yet.
Oh, I do that all the time. That's very motivating to me.
It's motivating.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's completely motivating. I just go, what are you doing? Could I do that? Could I do that better?
Yeah.
It's totally motivating to me.
What's one example of that? I mean, I love unpacking motivation.
In cartoons. All of my heroes, I literally copied. And one of my keys, one of my tricks for creativity is to find something you like, copy it, and then realize how bad you are at copying.
Yeah.
People won't even recognize it.
Yeah.
Like I drew comics that I thought looked like The Far Side, but they didn't. So it looks like my own creatures. I mean, so it's some combination of things I saw in Mad Magazine plus The Far Side plus Peanuts, Talking Dog. So all creativity is things you've seen and connected together.
That's great. So for you, it's been this duality of letting those 9 out of 10 failures just poof out of your mind, reframe for something else, and then treating the others around you as inspiring motivation versus competition. Or not competition per se, but a...
Competition is fine. Actually, I'm competitive by nature. I like competitive games and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So to me, that's not a negative. Like if I see somebody killing it, I think, well, why can't I have that? Why can't I do that? And it doesn't bother me. It just makes me feel good. Gives me energy.
I love that reframing.
So I don't think that was intentional. I think that might be just, I was born that way.
That's an innate
I think so.
feature. Oh, it is really,
Is it
it's
worse
really
for
beautiful.
women? Is it worse for women?
I can only speak for the women of my generation because that's all I know. The women of my generation grew up, born in the 80s, raised in, the first generation of DEI, told that you can do anything, you will do anything. And not only will you do anything, but you'll also do it all.
Yeah.
And so that is a big undertaking. This idea that, well, I can do everything, and I'm being told I ought to do everything. So if I don't do everything, is that a failure? and I will say it has resulted in my life in being motivated to often take on too much, taking a bite out of things that are really big, and then my life is chapter after chapter of these huge huge challenges and then overcoming many of them, but also failing sometimes and learning and getting back up and trying again. And so on one hand, I think this narrative has been very positive. On the other, it only works well if you live in a society that is maybe making sure that it has the basic resources to support that amount of human activity. So when I say, basic resources, like this mentality only really works if you're healthy, right? Because, let's just talk about childbearing years. These are these precious years that really dictate a lot of the decisions a woman makes in their 30s and 40s. And, in your 20s, I was of the generation where you take the 20s and you just work as hard as you can and you just, hit the ground running and figure out who you are and become this dream professional. In my case, I wanted to be a lawyer, a patent lawyer, and then I became a tech entrepreneur. But something happens, towards your late 20s, and this is work that I've since gotten very involved with. But these reproductive years, I'm learning, rely on our environment and how we are engaging with that environment. So clean food, clean water, plenty of sunlight and exercise. And we're realizing, really bringing things into balance as it relates to time spent in front of a computer.
That's a tough one.
That's a really tough one.
I don't know how you do that. I mean,
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to derail your story, but yeah.
Well, but to answer your story, I think that if we improve the environmental factors, then I do think that the narrative for women of, go out there, don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to take time to be creative, because creativity takes time.
I was just saying today on my live stream that I feel like you're aware that the reproduction rate has dropped below replacement in the United States. We're basically doomed unless we figure that out, because immigration isn't going to give us the same result.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're going to have to reinvent what it means to be a woman of childbearing age. And I don't think that it's all going to be, you meet a guy and you're married forever and all the things that used to work. I think the only thing that's going to work is women who want to have a kid and maybe live in a combined space with other women who have a kid, and they can watch each other's back and still have time to go to school and train for a job or something. But if you don't have like a village taking care of your kids, so there's always somebody there, they can't survive. I mean, you have to be watching them all the time now because there's just too many dangers.
And we live in a country where childcare resources are not readily available for new young mothers.
We don't have the grandparent thing so much. That was probably a bigger deal.
Yeah, and we are, there's no expectation that our grandparents help us raise our children. Many of us live in different towns than our parents, especially in our 20s. So I started the world's first fund for women's reproductive longevity and equality. I threw in the word equality because I thought it was important that we funded reproductive research in equal parts to, men's reproductive research.
What's that for, the scientific part?
So the fund, I put, this is now 5 years ago, I put $100 million into this dedicated pool to fund scientists to understand the pathways of reproductive aging. Because we have plenty of data that if you're a healthy woman in your late 40s and early 50s, you can conceive naturally and carry and bear a healthy child. So this is These are not outliers. The outliers are like in your 70s, like, at that point it's an outlier. But women's reproductive function has changed. Something has changed. And yes, the statistics that say, well, on average around 35 reproductive capacity goes down. But then when I went through this process when I was looking at doing IVF and egg freezing in my early 30s, and it became very clear to me that the science was not well developed. Doctors couldn't tell you why some women could have healthy children in their early and late 40s, and some women in their late 20s weren't able to conceive.
So you're trying to find out before you do the conceiving whether somebody's able to do it healthy.
We don't have any of the science. So any of the core ovarian science, it's missing. It's about 75 years behind every other organ.
Wow.
I was shocked too to find this out. And then I was even more shocked to find out that the government wasn't funding it. So NIH.
At the same time, there's a reproductive shortage.
And at the same time, our entire population is collapsing.
Right.
And our only option is to go to these clinics, these IVF clinics, which aren't actually fertility clinics as we think about fertility, because they're not increasing a woman's fertility. They're actually addressing the fact that a woman's fertility is not where she would like it to be, and they extract the eggs and use reproductive assistants to come in and to do that piece in a laboratory. And so my involvement in this over the years went from looking at it as let's fill in the science, to realizing, oh my God, there's something going on. There's something really serious going on.
As in the food or the pollution?
All of it is impacting.
That's what I think too.
It's all of it.
Yeah.
So all of these environmental factors, and I'm glad we're talking about this. It wasn't on my agenda to talk about, but the
testosterone drop as well. That can't be unrelated to all of this.
It's 100% related. Yeah. I mean, sperm rates are just, plummeting, and it's happening very fast. So I just keep hearing of case after case of these young men.
I think it's food.
Well, we are finding it's the food. We're finding it's the water.
The water, yeah.
We're finding it's lifestyle.
But I'll bet you if you ranked them,
yeah,
it would be food, and then a little lifestyle.
Depending on which scientist you're talking to.
Okay.
And I've met scientists that believe it's, and the WHO has even agreed to do research on this, but we're like an electrochemical species. So the people who study bioenergetics and cellular metabolic health, they think a lot of it is magnetic pollution. So
now it's funny you should say that, because I'm recently fascinated by grounding. Do you know what that is?
I love grounding.
Standing outside in bare feet, and it's supposedly. Now I approach this with maximum skepticism. It's like, oh yeah, you stand outside for 5 minutes in your bare feet, and your electrical signals will all be okay, and you'll be healthier. And I'm like, I don't think so. But what's it cost me to try? Right, that's my general philosophy. If I can try it at no expense, no risk. So I take my shoes off, go outside, and I stand in the sun, because I'm doing the Andrew Huberman thing too.
Yeah.
And I think, why does this feel so damn good immediately? Yeah. Like, that's the part I can't explain. It immediately changes your whole body and mind just standing outside in your bare feet. And so I said to myself, as a child, I was barefoot all the time. But now it's not a thing. If somebody comes into your house, they're at least have their socks on or something. And I wondered, when you add the extra electrical signals, and then you add that we can't discharge them because we're always wearing shoes, it could be that simple. Or that could be a big part of it. So I'm very much on the hypothesis, certainly no decisions, but that there's something electrical going on.
That's wonderful to hear that you've had a positive experience with that. I too have realized that these small adjustments to how I engage with my natural environment are improving my health as well.
Yeah, you could really feel it in real time. Just all the little stuff. The Andrew Huberman stuff, like the breathing technique, the 2 inhales and then the exhale, completely works.
Yeah.
Like right away. It's amazing.
Thank you for that reminder.
Yeah.
So,
Two in through your nose, 1 long one through, exhale through your mouth. Do it like 3 times and it just changes your whole attitude.
yeah, it's really great. Well, let's talk about politics.
Sure.
You had asked me before we got on, you said, do you know what my political take is and stance? I was like, well, my understanding, Scott, is that you just really understand the zeitgeist of American politics. Like, you just get it. You predicted that Donald Trump would win in 2016. You were right. No, like that. And, you know, that none of the polls were saying he was going to win, but you knew. How'd you know?
I'm actually a hypnotist. So I studied hypnosis in my 20s, right after I got into college. And I noticed in him the techniques of persuasion that were not just good, but insane. Like, I just looked at him and I listened to him talk and watched how he would make you think past the sale, how he would use visual language. He would simplify, he would repeat, he'd come up with a nickname, he'd put a name on a thing. Yeah, one of my favorite things he says is, goes, "It's called." And then he gives it a name that he just made up himself. He goes, "It's called." And those little things are like little memory tags, because once he puts a name on it, it's easy to remember. You know,
Because the human brain loves labels.
we love labels because it gives us something to hold on to. And I kept watching his technique, and I thought, even 2015, I said, you guys are getting this all wrong. He might be the most persuasive person alive. Now, that sounded crazy when I started saying it, but if you look at it today, and you see that he's basically, he got it out the Republican Party and he uses it like a suit. Like, who can do that? Like, that is an unnatural amount of political ability. And even his enemies at this point will say, all right, we hate this or that about him, but he's really good at his political stuff. I mean, nobody's ever done the rallies like that. So the example I use is the wall. Normal politician says, well, we value border security, and we've got techniques and processes and things, and we'll tighten them up with a better budget. And Trump says, build a wall, a big beautiful wall, right? I mean, it's just classic persuasion technique to make it visual, because our visual sense is the primary sense. And he does that with a lot of other stuff. Even with his nicknames, they're often visual. He'd be like Sloppy. He'll call people sloppy because you just imagine him looking sloppy.
Why do you think that works for people and doesn't work for other people? Because a bunch of folks feel just innately offended by the way he uses words, and others are like, yes, build a wall. And it's not just build a wall, it's build a wall.
Well, part of it is not understanding his technique.
Yeah.
So he has a provocative technique, which he knows will anger like crazy some set of people, while it completely turns on the other people who need to vote for him in the primary. So he's figured out the method of who to excite and who to annoy in just the right combinations. So it's also, I think some of it is a little bit of a New York experience. He talks like I expect a New Yorker to talk. So it's something familiar to me. And I don't take any of his hyperbole seriously. So when he said, for example, the other day, people say you want to be a dictator. Well, it was a few months ago. And he said, no, I don't want to be a dictator. Well, for one day. I want to be a dictator for one day. And then he makes his statement about the border or something.
Yeah.
And people took that seriously.
Yeah.
Now, that could not be taken seriously, especially for one day. None of this suggests any kind of dictatorial ability. He has to know, because he's not dumb, he's not crazy, that the only way he can be the Donald Trump that he wants to be, the one that is in history goes down as a great president and his brand is revived from what it had been, the only way is he does the best job he can do. And there isn't any chance he becomes a dictator and takes over the country because Republicans don't want it. If he doesn't even have Republicans on board for him being a dictator, what's left?
Yeah, it's true. It's I've been trying to so much of Bobby Kennedy's campaign is about being somewhere in the middle of, all of this, because the Democratic Party is so terrified, and then they're selling fear of Donald Trump's dictatorship if he gets reelected. They have really really terrified. I mean, even my own family. They're like, Nicole, are you well? Like they're just they really questioned me for leaving the Democratic Party and even risking Donald Trump being reelected if we're not a spoiler campaign, I'll just say. But in the event that we didn't get on all ballots and we couldn't beat Donald Trump, that we would somehow be helping Donald Trump get reelected. And my family is so afraid of him.
Now, the weird thing is they saw him for 4 years. Mm-hmm. He's the most understood human being in the history of human beings.
Right.
He's the most vetted, the most tested through the judicial system. All of his books, all of his communications, they've been to everything.
Yeah.
And he had some dalliances with some women. That's what they found. He basically admitted that before he ran for office.
So how do we explain to those that are too terrified to vote for Bobby because they're afraid of Donald Trump getting reelected that it's okay? It's okay to vote for who you actually want to vote for.
Well, don't they have a right to vote strategically? I mean, certainly if they're afraid that their vote will take away from, Biden and get Trump elected, that's a fair vote.
That is.
I mean, it's not crazy. It's just based on emotion and a set of, I will call it brainwashing.
Yeah.
Because in my opinion, he's probably the safest president we've ever had. He's good on bluster, and he's good on making our enemies not know what he's going to do, which puts them off balance. And so far, looks like a really good plan. And he says it directly. I don't like to tell him what I'm doing. I like to keep him off balance. And we saw him do it, and we saw it work.
How do you feel about his handling of the economy? I mean, he's kind of the ultimate Keynesian operator. He loves moving debt around in fascinating ways.
I'm not one who thinks the president affects the economy as much as everything else. So presidents like to take credit when it goes up on its own and blame somebody else when it goes down on its own. There aren't that many things the president actually does. However, that's got to change now because the debt it's going to kill us. Like the debt is not survivable. I don't know if everybody fully understands. It's a country-ending situation.
It is a country-ending situation.
So whatever has to be done is going to be revolutionary. I mean, it's got to be the biggest thing that's ever been done. I don't even know what it would be. I mean, something massive has to happen. Trump had the idea of building cities from scratch. I love that idea because it's stimulative, but also you could build it so that somebody's cost of living went down to like $300 a month for really high quality living.
Yeah, and we could potentially have a productivity boom, a domestic productivity boom around
the robots and stuff.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure certainly the robots will play a role in that, and there's other forms of innovation that could play a role in that, but also just focusing. I mean, Russia did this when they were cut off from the rest of the world's economy in many ways, and they just focused internally on building up local economies.
Well, Russia's just got energy. Basically you take that away and everything collapses. So the ways I can see we could recover, we'd have to go hog wild on domestic energy to lower the prices for people so that there's any extra money that could pay down some debt. We'll probably have to renegotiate the debt in a way that
China
somehow we might have to give them equity. We might have to convert some of it to equity.
I don't think we do equity, but we can certainly find.
There might be a way. Because
other ways to lay.
whatever happens is going to be close to confiscatory. I mean, somebody's going to get it in the shorts, like whether it's the people who are owed the money or it's the taxpayers. I don't know, but somebody's going to take a big hit if we have any chance of paying it off. And I don't know if we do. Actually, I don't even know if it's possible.
Yeah, we've been speaking with many economists. It is possible. Um, Anything is possible, but it has to happen now. That's what I'm hearing from everyone. And it's probably going to take some combination of things involving quantitative easing, but certainly there is going to be required of us some combination of foreign policy mixed with our debt being part of that conversation.
But think about the size of things we would have to do. We would have to get our military spending under control,
And our healthcare spending.
And our healthcare spending. And of course, fixing the food. I know we're on the same page about getting the food supply fixed so we don't have the chronic illnesses and all that. So anybody who comes at me with that story already has my attention. So RFK Jr.'s focus on the food and the pharma is a really strong point for him, because I don't like people who can't figure out what the top priorities are. And the top priorities, in my view, are basically food and debt right now. And then DEI looks like it could end us, but I think we'll be able to figure that out. Yeah, that'll probably die on its own. It looks like it's self-destructive in a way.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we live in a capitalistic society, and if companies are failing as a result of their DEI policies, they will likely have to figure out how to adjust them while still meeting their goals.
I think the big corrective force is that the phrase DEI hire has entered the language. Now, once that enters the language, it's going to be humiliating for somebody who did it the hard way, earned everything they got, and then somebody's going to say, well, there's the DEI hire. Imagine that. Like, imagine working hard against all the odds, succeeding, and then somebody thinks, maybe you got here the easy way. It's not going to be something that people are going to want to embrace. So I think in a variety of ways, it's going to self-destruct and should.
Yeah. So this election, priorities, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the priority for the Bobby Kennedy ticket and why I decided to support him and leave the Democratic Party was understanding how much chronic health is costing our country. I see it in my own home, and it's, I see it in my neighborhood. It's 1 in 22 in the state of California, kids now diagnosed with autism.
Do you think that's diet related or genetic?
I think it's all of it. It's not genetic. I know it's not genetic because the yields on the genetic tests are less than 1% of all autism cases.
Now, the theory I heard is that people who have, usually smart people, if they find each other, they're more likely to produce an autistic child. Is that research bogus?
I've not seen research on smart people. I think it'd be a very hard thing to prove, but certainly there is an empirical correlation of in Silicon Valley, people involved in the tech industry having more kids on the spectrum. There is my personal understanding of it is that there's a potential hereditary composition that can be sensitive to certain environmental exposures. And it's truly a confluence of environmental exposures that leads to this. And we've talked about some of them. I mean, food is definitely one. Electromagnetic pollution is likely a second. And then other exposures, right? We have all kinds of exposures. Even, medicines that we take can alter our cellular metabolic health. And that's certainly going to impact babies and children because they're very sensitive. So I think, the priority for Bobby Kennedy's White House is really getting to the root cause of these issues. I was just speaking with Riley Gaines earlier today about Title IX and Biden overreaching into Title IX and changing it, making it not at all what it was initially intended for.
Right.
And young people like Riley have had their entire lives affected by this. These are athletes. These are lifetime young athletes that have given it their all.
Yeah. My take on the whole situation is that sports are broken. That we're acting like, the tweaks to the rules are what broke it. But everybody should be able to find somebody who's roughly the same level of competition that won't hurt you. You don't want to have women boxing with men. But co-ed soccer works great. A high-end female soccer player with average men, because I've been on those teams as the average man, works great, and everybody has a great time. But so you haven't had this experience yet, but if you get a kid into school sports, it wrecks your life. Some people love it, but other people, it just takes all of your free time to transport them and get them to all the practices and away games and travel games and this gigantic budget.
And elite sports too. I mean, if you have an elite athlete, that changes everything. It's like.
Yeah, I feel like we're trying to solve the wrong problem, which is if sports in general were made for all the right reasons, that you just got to compete and have fun and exercise and all that, we'd be a lot less sensitive about who's on the team, because all the teams would be designed for people of equal ability, no matter what their genitalia was.
Right. If it was a sport that intentionally had, slots for men and women, but then you even get into the question of who qualifies as a man and woman. And so, but yeah, I think that's an interesting, that goes back to your earlier statement when you were a child and thinking about choosing a career and turning away from law because you had this intuition about winning and losing, and your entire career has really been about creativity, which is getting totally beyond that. It's
a win-win. If somebody likes it and I get paid for it, we're all good.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So how are you reading the zeitgeist for this upcoming election?
Well, I think you're 3 heartbeats away from the presidency right now, because Biden, I don't even know if he's going to make it to the starting line. I do worry about the health of both RFK Jr. and Trump. I think we're in dangerous and uncertain times. And so I do worry about their physical safety. And the fact that Biden's administration is not giving Social Security to RFK Jr. is mind-boggling. I hear that and I think, well, surely that will be fixed right away, right? Because everybody can see. There couldn't be a clearer case where somebody should be getting, even if it's a marginal case, like this is the one you should do. And that is so dirty. The level of, I won't use the word, but the level of badness that suggests might be everywhere else is the mind-boggling part.
It's indicative of a bigger problem within that.
Doesn't feel like it stands
leadership.
alone. It doesn't. It feels like it's part of a pattern.
Yeah, I have to agree. Having been a lifelong Democrat, I've seen such disastrous leadership over the last 8 years over there, to the point where it was startling how little integrity and appreciation for the extraordinary need our government has right now. There's just no appreciation for that. And there's no appreciation for what's required of someone in these roles. And then misrepresentation of who these people are as individuals too. But it's across the board. And no wonder the American public has lost so much trust.
Yeah, maybe we know too much. Maybe the news isn't as monolithic as it used to be. Because the news used to tell us, oh, everybody looks pretty good. And maybe that was never the case.
Yeah.
I suspect we haven't been a real republic since JFK got taken out. I feel it feels as if there are powers behind the scenes in the intelligence community that are pushing the buttons and we don't see them. So that's what it feels like, based on what you observe, not on my internal special knowledge. But what I observe, looks like we have a lot of presidents that have a connection to the CIA, and it looks like some people got taken out by ops. Tucker Carlson thinks that Richard Nixon got taken out by the CIA. We know Bush was in the CIA. There's a whole lot of CIA stuff permeating the presidency, both adding to and subtracting from the presidency, if you know what I mean. So that's the most worrying thing for me.
All right, Scott. So if you were to create a new comic today about a body of government, whether it be Congress or an agency or the White House, what would you pick?
Definitely the White House, because the comics work better if the people reading them kind of know the world and you don't have to explain it too much. So Congress is a little bit more, rules based, that we don't know all their weird rules, but we kind of feel we know what the president does. And so that would be the one. I would definitely do the president.
And what kind of president? Any specific president?
Oh, well, here's a kind of humor trick. The fish out of water is always the best thing, or the thing that's opposite.
Yeah.
So if you're doing a doctor, the humorous version of a doctor is a person who really wants you to die. It really hates people.
Yeah.
So the humorous version of a president would be somebody who's the least presidential. So I think Veep did a good job of that.
Yes.
As the vice president of behind the scenes. There's a cursing, stupid, selfish, horrible thing.
Yeah.
So it'd probably be just some exaggerated version where everybody's super selfish. What makes a comic funny is the selfishness or short-sightedness of the characters.
Well, we don't have to name names. I've got a few in mind that could be good examples. But well, thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Your read on and sharing your personal experience, but also your read on where we are today in this country has just been fascinating to hear. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.